Y&R Spoilers reveal that Diane stands quietly at the edge of the second-floor hallway of the Abbott mansion, looking down into the living room, where conversations and calculating glances constantly clash like poisonous arrows hidden in the glittering silk of Genoa City's elite. A vague sense of unease wells up inside her, as if a great storm is about to erupt and she cannot sit idly by and let her children be swept away. Having lived through so many events, Diane knows the warning signs of a disaster when it begins to lurk, quietly approaching her family step by step, especially when women like Audra Charles creep into Kyle's life, bringing with them both ambition and unpredictable venom. Lately, Diane has clearly sensed a change in the way Kyle acts. He is increasingly insecure, anxious, often has trouble sleeping, avoids direct conversations with his mother, and is always in a state of hiding something. She knew clearly that the source of all the trouble came from the increasingly dense appearance of Audra, a woman with a charming beauty but also containing many dangers. Diane had witnessed many times Audra using those cold eyes to observe Kyle, like a patient predator waiting for its prey to fall into its trap. Diane understood that in this world, survival did not only depend on feelings or honesty, but sometimes on the instinct of defense and the ability to see through other people's schemes. Diane silently watched Audra's every step, every fake intimate gesture she gave Kyle, and especially her calculating gaze every time she faced Claire, the girl Diane knew was gradually occupying an important place in Kyle's heart. However, as time went on, Diane realized more and more that Kyle and Claire's relationship was no longer as innocent and natural as before. Suddenly, invisible distances and unnecessary misunderstandings appeared between them, and it seemed that the coldness and hesitation were the result of the whispers and innuendos that Audra constantly planted in Claire's mind. As a mother, Diane could not bear to see her son gradually lose his happiness because of the dark plot of an outsider. Especially when Diane discovered that Audra deliberately created rumors about Kyle being responsible for a child of unknown origin, a vicious psychological game, to put pressure on both Kyle and Claire, making Claire confused about the loyalty of her lover, while Kyle was mired in confusion, fatigue and unclear guilt. That night, Diane could not sleep. She sat alone in the quiet room, lit a small lamp, her eyes glued to the calendar. Each page that passed was another day that Kyle fell deeper into Audra's spider web. Diane knew she had to act. There is no time to hesitate, because when a mother senses that her child is in danger, her instincts will urge her to become a mother bear ready to rush in to protect her cubs from all dangers, even when facing the most powerful forces. Diane begins to secretly collect evidence, quietly listen to conversations between Audra and people in the Abbott family, and closely observe what is happening at the Vibrante company, where Audra is playing a key role in a project that Victor personally supports. Diane realizes that Audra is not simply an ambitious woman, she is a cunning fox with sophisticated calculations and terrifying patience. Audra uses every trick to approach Kyle, sometimes with gentle words of concern, sometimes with direct psychological attacks with questions disguised under the guise of just wanting the best for you. But Diane, with her experience, is not easily fooled. She noticed that whenever Audra mentioned the Vibrante project, there was a strange glint in her eyes, as if something shady was going on behind the closed doors of the company. Diane decided to approach former Vibrante employees, trying to dig deeper into the internal operations, and quietly collect information about the shady finances related to Audra. But what worried Diane the most was that Kyle's feelings for Claire were gradually being eroded by Audra's tricks. Claire, who was a sensitive and vulnerable girl, began to doubt and distance herself from Kyle, despite all his efforts to explain and save the relationship. Diane saw clearly her son suffering from being misunderstood by the person he loved, as well as his helplessness when faced with accusations without evidence. She knew that if she didn't quickly expose Audra's true colors, things would go too far. Claire would leave Kyle, and Kyle would lose everything because of a dirty plot. One day, Diane unexpectedly discovers an important internal document. Evidence that Audra has forged documents related to the Vibrante project, and even used her power to force a subordinate to create false rumors about Kyle and an unidentified child. Diane immediately meets Jack to discuss but realizes that she cannot trust anyone, even in her own family at this time, because Victor, the person behind Audra, has too much influence, can control information and distort the truth in the blink of an eye. Diane decides to act alone, because she knows clearly. If she waits too long, Audra will have time to erase all traces, and Claire and Kyle will never be the same again. Diane tries to approach Claire, gently talking to help her dispel all suspicions, but also does not reveal the whole truth, because she knows that even a small mistake can push Claire towards Audra. Diane patiently planted the seeds of sobriety in Claire's mind, advising her to believe in true feelings, while emphasizing that she should not rush to believe in rumors without clear evidence. Claire, after Diane's experienced confessions, gradually regained her balance, although she still had many worries in her heart. Diane knew that she had only gone halfway, the most important task was still ahead. Exposing Audra right in front of Kyle and Claire, forcing her to reveal her true face, as well as completely breaking up the plot to separate the two young people's feelings. Diane arranged a surprise meeting between Kyle, Claire, and Audra right in Kyle's office in Abbott Tower. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Audra appeared with a confident smile, believing that she was still in control of the situation, while Kyle was full of anxiety. Claire was cold and suspicious. Diane kept calm, opened her laptop, and projected onto the screen the evidence of the fake emails, the recordings of Audra directing her employees to create false rumors about Kyle, and finally the fake documents related to the Vibrante project. The truth surged like a tidal wave, drowning all the schemes and lies. Audra was speechless, unable to defend herself, while Claire was stunned, tears welling up in her eyes because she regretted ever doubting the person she loved the most. Kyle, after a moment of shock, turned to hug Diane. Only then did he truly understand that, no matter how mature and strong he was, he still needed the protection of his mother, someone who was willing to do everything, even confront the most powerful people to protect her son's happiness. Diane didn't say much, just silently looked at Kyle, her eyes filled with love and pride of a mother bear who had fulfilled her responsibility. Audra, exposed, was forced to leave the room, carrying defeat and bitterness, while Diane knew that, despite many storms, today, she had kept the most precious thing: family, love and trust. And in that moment, Diane silently thanked her maternal instinct for urging her to act, because if not, everything could have spiraled out of control, pushing Kyle and Claire away from each other forever. Diane understood that the journey to protect the people she loved would never end, but at least, she had won a big battle, bringing temporary peace to the Abbott family, and above all, affirming the bravery of a woman who never surrendered to any force, whether it was Victor, Audra, or anyone else. In the tense atmosphere of the Abbott residence, the early mornings became more stifling than ever as Claire, with sad and suspicious eyes, quietly watched Kyle prepare for a new work day. The tension could no longer be hidden as there were more and more unnameable silences, half-hearted words, evasive looks, and sometimes even a simmering disappointment that no one wanted to mention. Claire no longer recognized the warmth in Kyle's eyes, but instead there was an unusual preoccupation, a state that she could not touch, as if he was busy with some secret world that she had no right to interfere with. Claire knew the source of all this turmoil, because the name Audra Charles rang in her head like an endless refrain. Audra, a woman known for her manipulation and vicious moves, now appears close to her boyfriend, not only in meetings, but also in late dinners, long phone calls, and seemingly accidental but meaningful touches. Claire is not naive enough to not realize the danger of Audra approaching Kyle, especially when everyone knows that Audra has never failed in the power games in Genoa City. She knows very well that, next to Kyle, Audra is not just a business partner, but also a real threat to the relationship between her and the man she loves. However, when Claire protests, her disappointment grows when Kyle, instead of listening, only responds with forced smiles, gentle lies, or worse, ignores and disregards her feelings. For Kyle, everything is still under his control. He believed that his little game with Audra was just an investigation to find out the truth behind the shady contracts that Audra was doing for Victor. But Kyle forgot that stubbornness and overconfidence were double-edged swords that could hurt the person he loved the most. He had no idea that every time he witnessed Kyle pretending to be intimate or even intentionally getting close to Audra to gather information, Claire felt like hundreds of needles were piercing her self-esteem and trust in her lover. She painfully realized that the distance between them was growing larger, and the feeling of betrayal, even if it was only emotional, was enough to make her heart bleed. Every attempt to talk between the two of them came to a dead end. Claire repeatedly asked Kyle to stop playing the detective in a game where Audra was the one in control. But Kyle, with his inherent pride as an Abbott, considered Claire's worries as just a woman's suspicion, not worth changing his plan. He even promised to be careful, that everything was under control, and that he did everything to protect the company, to protect them. But deep down, Kyle still acted on his own will, continued to have secret meetings with Audra, still wore a cold mask in front of Claire to hide the fact that he was also gradually being drawn into Audra's dangerous charm even though he himself did not realize it. Claire gradually became lost and lonely in her own home, where she should have felt the safest. Confiding in friends or relatives did not help her calm down, because everyone advised her to trust Kyle, to give him a chance. But Claire's heart told her the opposite: love cannot exist without honesty and respect for each other's feelings. She began to consider withdrawing, although she did not want to let go, but could not bear the feeling of being left out of Kyle's life forever, especially when he allowed himself to test the limits of love in such a selfish and heartless way. Elsewhere in the Abbott mansion, Diane, the most famous woman in Genoa City for her manipulation and classic plots, silently observed every development, not missing any small details. Having experienced many events, having confronted the most fearsome minds, Diane understood that when a woman like Audra entered the life of an Abbott man, it was not just a coincidence. Diane never believed in Audra's innocent actions, nor did she believe that Victor would let Audra act freely in big deals without any hidden agenda. Diane quietly gathers information, monitors Audra's every move, and tries to protect Kyle from the insidious attacks of outsiders even as her son is slowly drawn into a dangerous spiral. At first, Diane chose to stay out of the way, only intervening when absolutely necessary, because she understood that, after years of being the family manager, too much intervention could be counterproductive, especially when Kyle was at the age of deciding his own life. But everything changed when Diane discovered unusual signs, shady financial documents related to Audra's company, secret meetings with Victor, and especially information about the projects that Audra was trying to hide. Seeing the danger clearly, Diane could no longer sit still. Her instinct to protect her family rose strongly, urging her to act, despite criticism of her many tricks in the past. She began to infiltrate Audra's company, even secretly cooperating with a few old business partners to expose shady transactions. Diane spent nights poring over documents, analyzing cash flows, tracing internal emails to find concrete evidence to confront Audra, who she knew would not be easily defeated by mere warnings or conventional power plays. Diane also spent time talking to Claire, gently helping her overcome her feelings of disappointment and insecurity, advising her not to rush into extreme decisions without knowing the full truth behind Kyle's actions. Although she did not say it, Diane understood Claire's hurt, and deep down, she wanted to keep both women for the Abbott family, because not only did Kyle need Claire, but Diane also saw in Claire a sympathy, a new faith in the future. Meanwhile, Kyle's situation became more and more complicated. The evidence Diane found made her even more worried about her son. Not only Audra but also Victor are using Kyle as a pawn in a big game, a game where just one wrong move can cost Kyle everything. Love, career, family reputation. Diane decides to be more proactive. She organizes a surprise meeting, where Kyle, Claire, and Audra are present. In the room filled with light but full of tension, Diane presents a series of evidences of Audra's secret operations, and forces Kyle to face the truth that he is becoming a puppet in the hands of Victor and Audra. She not only saves Kyle's honor but also indirectly helps Claire see the true nature of everything, that Kyle's feelings for her have never changed, that everything Kyle does, even if wrong, comes from the desire to protect his family, to protect Claire herself from evil forces. Driven to the brink, Audra had no choice but to admit part of the truth, but still tried to salvage her last bit of honor with weak excuses. However, Diane prevailed. She not only proved her mettle as a mother willing to do everything to protect her son, but also taught Kyle a valuable lesson about the value of honesty, respect for one's lover, and knowing how to listen to the feelings of others. Claire, after all, gradually calmed down, realizing that Kyle's true feelings for her were still intact, even though they had gone through a challenging journey. That night, when everyone returned home, Diane sat alone in the small room, sipping hot tea, her eyes distant but filled with satisfaction. She knew that the journey to protect the people she loved was still long, because Genoa City was never peaceful for too long, but at least, she had kept her family from falling apart again, and had taught the younger generation a lesson about the courage, bravery, and intelligence needed to survive in a world full of intrigue and lies. And in another place in the mansion, Kyle, after all the events, was finally able to sit next to Claire, hold her hand tightly, whisper apologies and promise to never let anyone come between them again. Claire smiled, tears of happiness rolling down, because she knew that in love, the most important thing was trust, and they had found it again, thanks to the alertness, determination and bravery of Diane Jenkins, a mother that no force in Genoa City could defeat. In the fake peace of the Abbott mansion, Diane silently observed every move of those who seemed to hold the fate of her family in their hands. Behind every polite greeting, every fake smile, there were cold calculations that Diane could clearly sense with the instinct of an experienced mother, a woman who had survived many life-and-death battles in Genoa City, where every secret could become a weapon, every mistake had to be paid for with the most precious things. What Diane witnessed was something she could not ignore. Kyle, the son she loved, was falling into the trap set by Audra and Victor every day. Behind the cover of a business project, Audra silently sowed seeds of doubt and division in Claire's heart, gradually making the relationship between Kyle and Claire as fragile as a thread. No one in Genoa City is naive enough to not recognize Victor's powerful shadow in every earth-shattering plan, but this time, what makes Victor absolutely confident is his pride deceived by the past. He never expected that, while all the pawns are moving as he wishes, there is still another chess piece, a silent opponent with the same ambition and courage as him, Diane Jenkins Abbott. Diane is not the type of woman who easily surrenders to great forces. Years of struggling, fighting wits with Victor himself, learning to survive and protect herself when everyone turns their backs, have forged her into a mother who can see through the most vicious tricks. What makes Diane different and more dangerous than any opponent is the driving force behind it, maternal love. There is nothing stronger and more unpredictable than the desire to protect her child from misfortune, from all the pitfalls of power and ambition. Everything starts with small changes but enough to make Diane alert. She clearly felt the tension between Kyle and Claire, noticed Claire's disappointed and tired eyes every time Audra was mentioned, clearly saw Kyle's insecurity when having to hide secret meetings, plans for work but causing deep pain to the person he loved the most. Diane understood that if she did not quickly intervene, she would lose both her son and the chance to mend a beautiful relationship. While Audra believed that everything was in the palm of her hand, Diane quietly began her investigation. Unlike previous confrontations, this time Diane acted extremely cautiously. She not only placed people to monitor Audra's every move, but also approached each employee of the company, probed secret conversations in conference rooms, checked internal emails, monitored money transfers and discovered many unusual signs in the contracts that Audra was in charge of. With each piece of evidence she gathered, Diane became more certain of Audra's true intentions, to exploit Victor's trust in her to manipulate Kyle, make Claire suspicious, and thus divide and control the entire Abbott in the direction that Audra, and Victor, desired. However, there was one thing that both Audra and Victor underestimated: Diane's patience, persistence, and sharp intuition. For weeks, Diane kept quiet, only occasionally accidentally reminding Claire to trust Kyle, that she shouldn't let rumors affect their love. She observed every little change, every unusual expression in Audra's attitude toward Kyle, every glance between the staff when they thought no one was looking. Diane knew that if she wanted to win, she couldn't act rashly. She patiently gathered all the pieces, waiting for the right moment to strike the decisive blow, a blow that could shatter Victor's pride, expose Audra's true colors, and protect Kyle's fragile happiness with Claire.